The Count had already negotiated with the SS leader in February and March of 1945 for the release of nearly 7,800 non-Jewish Scandinavian prisoners from concentration camps. During those meetings, Bernadotte had also dealt with Brigade Führer Schellenberg. Schellenberg had arranged for Himmler to meet Bernadotte on the morning of April 21 and then again on the night of April 23 into the morning of April 24 at the Swedish consulate in the German town of Lübeck, where the Swedish Red Cross had already established a headquarters. The two meetings appear to have gone as follows. On April 21, Bernadotte began by asking Himmler if the SS chief would agree to release the French women prisoners who were Gentiles from Ravensbrück. Himmler, fresh from his negotiations with Masser, and most likely because of the commitment he had already made to the emissary of the Jews, was now prepared to promise even more. He first informed the Swedish Count of his middle-of-the-night agreement with the Jewish envoy to release 1,000 Jewish women and allow the Red Cross to transport them to Sweden. The head of the Gestapo then, either at their meeting on April 21 or the subsequent meeting of April 23rd to April 24th, promised the Swedish Count that he would also free the other women in the camp. This would mean the release of French, Dutch, Polish Gentile prisoners, and perhaps even the Jewish captives not selected as part of the 1,000 he had already agreed to free. Though Bernadotte had been hesitant in the past to risk the safety of his Red Cross workers, he agreed to provide the buses and drivers for these potentially dangerous rescue missions. At that April 23 to 24 meeting with Bernadotte, Himmler was more specific than he had been 3 days earlier with the Jewish emissary about the particulars of what he expected in exchange for these prisoner releases. Himmler asked the Count to convey to the Swedish government, and then to General Eisenhower, his willingness to surrender his German forces on the Western Front. He may not have been offering total, unconditional surrender, but if Himmler could actually accomplish what he was proffering, it was not an insignificant proposal, and Bernadotte agreed to have the message delivered. Without the Count and his Red Cross, the rescue of the women of Ravensbrück could not have taken place. Not only did he arrange transport for my mother and the nearly 1,000 women freed with her, he appears to have participated in the negotiations that would a few days later also emancipate most of the rest of the women from the camp. He accomplished much, and much gratitude is owed him. Yet, though a minor criticism compared to what he actually accomplished, there is at least some plausible evidence to suggest that the Count may have had a penchant for not always sharing credit with others who also participated in the rescuing of prisoners. Bernadotte authored 3 separate books about his own humanitarian contributions as a leader of the Swedish Red Cross. The first of these, Last Days of the Third Reich, the diary of Count Falk Bernadotte, was published a mere 6 weeks after the end of the war, and is therefore perhaps the most reliable account of Bernadotte's exploits. Though he discusses his involvement in many rescues, there is a total absence of any mention of the Jews. This is particularly interesting when compared to Masser's report to the World Jewish Congress, apparently written April 22, 1945, detailing his own negotiations and agreement with Heinrich Himmler to free the Jewish women from Ravensbrück. Even a strong advocate of the credit justifiably owed the Count for his efforts to free prisoners also concedes that this particular diary reveals the author to have been quite self-absorbed. If in fact Bernadotte was the one who negotiated the release of the group of 1,000 Jewish women that included my mother, it is unlikely that modesty would have prevented him from including so significant an accomplishment. There would seem to be only 2 reasonable explanations for why the Count would not mention such a success. The first possibility is that perhaps Bernadotte feared a negative reaction from his own countrymen if they learned that he had spent any of his diplomatic capital rescuing Jews. On the other hand, there is also a second possible reason for his failure to mention his negotiations to save the Jewish women of Ravensbrück. It could be that his part was actually so small as to not warrant inclusion, even by a self-absorbed writer. As the post-war months passed, and the true enormity of the Holocaust revealed, the failure of organizations like the Red Cross to save Jews became a liability to the reputation of not only the Red Cross itself, but also its leaders like Bernadotte. In Bernadotte's next book, The Curtain Falls, published later in 1945.